If ladies must study for a bit of effect, we will give them a recipe for a pretty expression of the mouth. Let them place it as if they were going to say prunes.
That was the advice offered by the People's Journal in the early days of photography. After photography became public in 1839, it wasn't long before most towns had a portrait studio, and a few of the earliest still survive, like the Reeves Studio, which has been in the same family now for nearly 130 years in the Sussex town of Lewes. The local brewery here still bears the name of Harvey's, and the Reeves first photographed the Harveys, old and young, back in the 1860s. This is Coppard's, the local butcher's, dressed for a Victorian Christmas. The shop in Lewes High Street still survives, as does a portrait of Mr. Coppard, taken by Reeves in 1878. A corn and grain shop was set up in 1823 by the Elphics, and the same family still runs it today. The Elphics first sat for their portraits back in the 1860s. All those portraits were taken in this glass-roof studio in Lewes more than a century ago. In this studio, the Reeves family took portraits and glass plates right up until 1974, and they kept every one of these glass negatives. There are now some 5 tons of them in the vaults here. The great majority of early photographs were in fact portraits. That's what people wanted most out of photography when it was first invented. Images of themselves, of their family, and of their friends. The power of the portrait was its ability to summon up memories of kith and kin in an age when communities and families were being broken apart. And it could also be used simply to summon up memories of one's own more youthful image. Whatever use it was put to, photography democratized the image. It allowed ordinary people a privilege previously reserved only for the rich. Because before photography, if you wanted a likeness, it had to be painted, and that meant paying for talent and for time. The painted portrait spoke formally of the subject's place in the world. Status, wealth, and seriousness of purpose were all put in public display. It's not surprising that only the rich could afford a painted likeness. Portraits like these could take 50 sittings to perfect. Down at the cheaper end of the market was the miniature, the demand for which grew with the expanding middle class. At first, the painter's ability to flatter seemed to give the miniature the edge over cold photography. The shortcomings of early photography were confirmed by one sitter's experience in London in 1841.
I was seated in the full blazing sunshine, and after an exposure of about a minute, the plate was developed. My eyes were made to stare until the tears streamed from them, and the portrait was, of course, a caricature. I paid a guinea for it. It has since faded.
Early cameras were slow by today's standards. The exposures could take up to minutes, and of course, if you moved, it blurred and spoiled the picture. So people were held firmly in place by this device, the hidden neck clamp. And of course, in these old studios, they needed strong light, so all of them have glass roofs. And this one has a system of blinds, which you can pull up and down to control the light falling in a sitter's face. So People would come here with their shillings or their half-crowns, dressed in a Sunday best, and they'd sit there for long seconds staring at a contraption which they didn't understand, which somehow delivered their image back in a plate. One photographer's injunction was, "Sit there, still as death." It's little wonder that in their studio portraits, the Victorians are not amused. Some portraits aren't just somber, they're downright sinister. These were taken on the plantations of South Carolina in 1850 for scientists trying to prove photographically that African slaves were an inferior species. This is the hand of a Captain Walker who tried to free the slaves. He was caught and branded with the letters SS for slave stealer. Monuments like this commemorate the anti-slavers of New England. And the two photographers who took the picture of the branded hand must have been sympathetic to the abolitionists, for they also took pictures of these monuments newly erected in this cemetery in Massachusetts 130 years ago. Albert Southworth and Josiah Hawes got together in Boston in 1843 and made themselves an international reputation. They were soon able to claim that they took the best daguerreotype portraits in the world. Now, Southworth and Hawes were always experimenting, and that cost them money. So unlike the other portrait factories that set up in the big towns, they never made a fortune. The standards were simply too high. 1,600 of the daguerreotype portraits still exist today, and no two of them look alike. They had to make do instead with prestige. And the studio soon became a salon for many of the most famous people in New England. But they also shared the 19th century obsession with death, the obsession which built the big tombs here in the Boston Cemetery, which Southworth and Hawes photographed. And they also took another kind of picture, which we might find distasteful today, but was very common then, the deathbed portrait. In an age when half the children might die in childhood, remembrance portraits were often taken before the funeral. Deathbed photographs brought no embarrassment. Death was too familiar. This is Albert Southworth, who clearly saw himself as an artist. The remarkable range of Southworth and Hawes portraits led some to acclaim them the best in the world. Their studio soon became a leading salon for New England notables. Harriet Beecher Stowe, author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Lola Montez, Irish adventuress and mistress of kings. Charles Goodyear vulcanized rubber and invented the Goodyear tire. Every portrait was a conscious attempt not just to give a good likeness, but to discover and express the individuality of each subject. But for young ladies, said Southworth, beauty must come before truth. Even so, the character of each of these sisters has survived any attempt at photo flattery. In Britain, with its leisured upper class, the art of portrait photography was raised to its highest level by gifted amateurs. These distinctive family pictures were taken by Lady Hawarden at her townhouse in Kensington around 1860. One of Lady Hawarden's admirers was the Reverend Charles Dodson, better known as Lewis Carroll. He took up photography in 1855, and his bachelor rooms at Christ Church, Oxford, soon became a paradise of toys and fancy dresses. Lewis Carroll once said he was fond of all children except boys. And it was his affection for little girls that inspired him one hot summer's afternoon in 1862.
A boat beneath a sunny sky, lingering onward dreamily in an evening of July. Children free that nestle near, eager and willing, pleased our simple tale to.
Carroll's favourite subject was the girl he made immortal, Alice Liddell, Alice in Wonderland.
Still she haunts me, phantom-wise, Alice, moving under skies, never seen by waking eyes, dreaming as the days go by, dreaming as the summers die, ever drifting down the stream. Life, what is it but a dream?
Alice Liddell was later portrayed as a young lady by the greatest of all English amateurs, a photographer who got her first camera as a birthday present when she was 48 years old. Her name was Julia Margaret Cameron. Mrs. Cameron made large portraits in close-up, dramatically lit from the top and side, and sometimes out of focus. Her story is that while exploring the camera, she simply screwed up the lens until she thought it was right, and then started shooting. It wasn't right, but it was original. Mrs. Cameron scorned the neck clamp, and her large glass plates could take as long as 4 minutes to expose. But her social position assured her the cooperation of the most eminent Victorians, like her hero, Alfred Lord Tennyson. when Tennyson brought the American poet Longfellow to sit for the ardent and rather eccentric Mrs. Cameron, he warned him.
You will do whatever she tells you. I shall return soon and see what is left of you.
Among her many sitter victims were Charles Darwin, the novelist Anthony Trollope, and the historian Thomas Carlyle. While Mrs. Cameron was pursuing her quest for truth and beauty down in the Isle of Wight, just along the coast here at Lewes, the first Mr. Reeves was already in his studio and making about 500 portraits a year. In 1861, when Mr. Reeves had been in business some 7 years, the census discovered nearly 3,000 professional photographers in Britain. Of course, the pulse of life in Lewes was a world away from the high style of people like Antoine Claudet in London. He had a temple to photography built in Regent Street by the same man who built the Palace of Westminster. However, one professional outshone them all. That was the photographer who himself became a celebrity, the man known to all Paris as the Great Nadar. Nadar took the first aerial photograph from a balloon and even designed a helicopter. Nadar was also a satirist, a left-bank bohemian who made photography his art in 1853. He said those he did best were those he knew best, and Nadar knew just about everybody, including the girls of the Folies Bergère. Paris was the capital of the 19th century, and Nadar's studio attracted the celebrities of the age. Composers like Offenbach, Berlioz, Rossini, the poet Baudelaire, Mikhail Bakunin, the Russian revolutionary, Victor Hugo, the great radical writer back from exile, and on his deathbed in 1885. This is Nadar's own mother, Thérèse Tournachon. And in disguise, the writer Georges Sand. And the most beautiful actress of the day, Sarah Bernhardt. A French critic once wrote, "To love life is the gift of poets, and Nadar has it like no one else." While none of the other professionals could match Nadar's flair for self-promotion, they did have their own repertoire of tricks. On the retouching table, they could wipe out gently all the wrinkles in the dress, or even in the face, and for a few shillings more, you could even have a touch of colour in the cheek. For people with dark features, they could be strongly lit from all sides, and ladies with plump faces were bathed in soft light through this diffuser. Many studios had a selection of backdrops, and some of them were in rolls, which could be turned round through the seascapes, through the woodlands, or through the elegant panelled rooms, until something was found to the sitter's taste. And then there were other props to the ego. In the earliest days, people enjoyed posing beside classical pillars. Then the next fashion was for rustic bridges and rural styles. But here, in the Reeve studio in Lewes, there was nothing too extravagant, which, in its matter-of-fact way, might have been quite sensible. After all, that century and a quarter of anxieties and small vanities simply ended up as 5 tons of old images on glass plates. The clothes, the backcloths, the sober expressions, all proclaim the solidity of English provincial life in Victorian times. As the decades roll forward from the 1850s, little seems to change in the small world seen by the Reeves camera in Lewes. Yet these portraits of anonymous people long dead can still exert a peculiar appeal, that quality special to old photographs, which the critic Walter Benjamin once tried to describe. For the last time, he said, the aura emanates from the early photograph and the fleeting expression of the human face. This is what constitutes their melancholy, incomparable beauty.
In the next episode of Camera, Gus MacDonald describes how the Victorians enjoyed what they called photographic pleasures. The last years of the century brought the snapshot, the revolution which put photography in the hands of anyone who could point a box straight and push a button.